This is AP Calculus 3.5 Part 2. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk about derivative rules graphically. And in a function like this, what they're going to do is they're going to give you a couple different graphs, and hopefully you can see these graphs well enough up here. The black function here is f of x, and the red function is g of x. And notice that I've got different points included on both f of x and g of x. And you need to understand here with the graph, if I were to ask you to find f of 4, well, you would go to 4 on the f function and tell me what the y coordinate of that point would be. It would be -1. So that would represent f of 4 equals -1. If I ask you for f of 0, well, that would be at 5. F of 0 is 5. If I ask for g of 3, that would be at -6. G of 3 is -6. But if I ask you for f prime of 1, f prime of 1 is the slope of this line that goes through the point f of 1. So the slope of that line, if I look at it, I would start here, I would go up 3, left 2, up 3, left 2. So f prime at 1 is -3/2. G prime at -2 would be 0. So the g prime and the f prime represents the slope at that point, and f of the number represents the y coordinate at that point. So here's what they're going to do. They're going to tell you that h of x is f of x times g of x, and they're going to tell you that p of x is f of x over g of x. So they're going to give us something about the function, and then they're going to ask us to find h prime of 7. If they ask us to find h prime of 7, well, h of x is f of x times g of x. So we know we're going to use the product rule with that. So h prime of 7, we're going to take the derivative first. If we know h prime of x is f of x times g of x, then we're going to use the product rule to find h prime of 7. So h prime of 7 is going to be, I'm going to take the derivative of the first function, f prime of x, or in this case x is 7, times g of 7 plus f of 7 times g prime of 7. And then I'm going to find this information using my graphs. So f prime of 7 is the slope of the f function at 7. Well, here's 7. The slope of the f function at 7 is 1/3. So I'm going to replace f prime of 7 with 1/3. G of 7 is -7. So I'm going to replace g of 7 with -7. F of 7 is 0. G prime of 7 is the slope of this portion of the g function. That looks like that slope is 1. So that's 0 times 1. Well, this is nice because this part drops out because of that 0. So we've got -7/3. So h prime of 7 is -7/3. So we've used a graph to do an application of the product rule there. Next, I want to find p prime of -2. Well, we know that p of x is f of x over g of x. So to take the derivative of that, we would be using the quotient rule. So p prime of -2 means we take the derivative of this using the quotient rule. The derivative of the top would be f prime of -2 times the original bottom, g of -2, minus the original top, f of -2, times the derivative of the bottom, g prime of -2, and that's all over the bottom squared. So that's g of -2 squared. So then if we look at the graphs to fill in that information, f prime of -2 Well, at negative 2, the f function has a slope of 1/2. I'm gonna put it down here. So p prime of negative 2 equals f prime of negative 2. That's the slope of the f function at negative 2. That's 1/2. Times g of negative 2. That's the y-coordinate of the g function at negative 2. That's a negative 4. Minus f of negative 2. At negative 2, the f function is 4. Times g prime at negative 2. The derivative of the g function at negative 2 is 0. Remember, when we're finding g prime or f prime, we're finding the slope of the tangent line at that point. And then g of negative 2. G of negative 2 was negative 4, and we have a negative 4 squared. So then to do the math, 1/2 times negative 4 is negative 2 minus 0 over 16, which would be a negative 1/8. P prime of negative 2 is negative 1/8. Now I'm going to do one involving the chain rule. I'm going to let j of x equal g of f of x. In other words, the f function is inside the g function. So if I were to take the derivative of that, I would have to use the chain rule. And remember, in the chain rule, we take the derivative of the outside function times the derivative of the inside function. So j prime of x would be equal to g prime of f of x times the derivative of the inside part, f prime of x. So if I were to ask you to find j prime of negative 4, well, we would have to plug a negative 4 in for all of those x's. So we would have g prime of f of negative 4 times f prime of negative 4. So f of negative 4, that's the y-coordinate at negative 4 for the f function. That would be a 3. So we have g prime of 3 times f prime of negative 4. Well, f prime of negative 4 is the slope of the tangent line at negative 4. It looks like it's a 1/2. So that would be times 1/2. Then we have to go to the g function and find g prime of 3. Well, if we go to 3 on the g function, that slope is 2 over negative 3, so negative 2/3. So we have a negative 2/3 times 1/2, which is a negative 1/3. So j prime of x, using the chain rule, is negative 1/3.